They say love conquers all. But what happens when love is tested by betrayal, ambition, and the relentless gaze of the world? Imagine standing in the middle of a storm, every eye watching, every word analyzed, every action dissected in public forums and tabloids alike. Now imagine that storm is your family, your closest relationships, and the betrayal comes from the person you trusted most. That is exactly the position Prince Harry found himself in, and the ripple effects have shocked the world. The apology he delivered was not just words. It was the culmination of months, maybe years, of tension, secrecy, and decisions that no one outside those walls can fully understand. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. You might be asking yourself, what could have possibly forced the youngest son of the Prince of Wales, a man who has spent his life balancing duty and independence, to step forward publicly, bow his head, and apologize to King Charles and Prince William? Was it fear, regret, or something far more complicated? A betrayal so deep that it left him with no other choice? Today, we are going to unpack every detail, every hidden conversation, every behind-the-scenes moment that led to this unprecedented act. And by the end of this story, you'll be left questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and power in one of the world's most scrutinized families. It all started quietly, small moments that, in hindsight, were red flags flashing in the background. Perhaps it was a text left unanswered, a late-night conversation that went off the rails, or a whisper in the corridors of Kensington Palace that hinted at tensions nobody outside could comprehend. For months, Harry tried to navigate the impossible, supporting Meghan Markle, protecting his family, and shielding his own emotional well-being from a media that would never let him breathe. But secrets have a way of surfacing, and when Meghan's actions, whatever they may have been, were finally exposed, Harry had to confront a reality he never wanted to face. The woman he loved may have betrayed not just him, but the institution he was born to serve. We have to pause for a moment to understand the gravity of this. Harry is not just any man. He is a prince, raised under the weight of centuries of tradition, expectation, and public scrutiny. Every misstep is magnified. Every personal choice becomes headline news. And yet, he is also a husband, a father, and a son. When Meghan's alleged betrayal came to light, it wasn't merely a private heartbreak. It was a public crisis, one that forced him to act in a way that no ordinary person could understand. Could you imagine having to apologize publicly for someone else's actions, knowing that every word would be judged, every intonation criticized, every motive questioned? That is the burden Harry carried into his apology, and the world watched, breathless. But what exactly happened? What does it mean when a member of the royal family calls out betrayal and then turns to face the very people they may have wronged? To grasp the full story, we need to go back to the beginning, the early days of Meghan's introduction into the royal fold, the moments that seemed insignificant at the time but later proved to be pivotal. Harry met Meghan at a time when the media was relentless, when the paparazzi followed his every step, and when rumors about his relationships and personal life were already circulating with alarming speed. She was charming, poised, and articulate, a perfect partner, some said, for a prince looking for love outside the confines of royal expectations. Yet behind closed doors, not everything was as it appeared. While the public saw smiles, elegant appearances, and charitable engagements, the palace experienced a different reality. Meghan's actions began to cause tension among aides, advisors, and, most significantly, the family. Arguments escalated. Decisions that once seemed collaborative became contentious. And slowly, over time, the seeds of betrayal, whatever form they took, were planted. Harry, torn between love and duty, found himself trapped in a situation with no clear solution. Perhaps the most striking part of this story is how public it became. Imagine discovering that someone you trust is not only deceiving you, but doing so under the relentless scrutiny of millions. Every leaked email, every whispered rumor, every leaked photo or story added layers of pressure. For Harry, this wasn't just about personal heartbreak. It was about protecting his integrity, preserving his family's reputation, and navigating a relationship that had suddenly become a minefield. And when the truth finally emerged, when the betrayal could no longer be contained or ignored, Harry faced a choice. confront Meghan privately and risk more damage, or step into the public eye and take responsibility on behalf of the family. The decision he made shocked everyone. In a carefully orchestrated statement, delivered with the weight of centuries of royal tradition behind him, Harry publicly apologized to his father and brother. The words were measured, yet heavy with emotion. They were not mere pleasantries or formalities. They were an acknowledgement of pain, a recognition of breach, and a moment of profound vulnerability. How often does the world see a royal at his most human? Not often. And this moment, this apology, would reverberate across continents, fueling debates, speculation, and intense public scrutiny. But let's be clear, this apology was not just about words. It was about a fracture within a family, one that had been slowly widening over years. It was about trust broken, promises unmet, and the difficult realization that love does not always conquer all, especially when combined with ambition, secrecy, and conflicting loyalties. And it was about a son who had to choose between the woman he loved and the family he could never escape. Every eye turned toward him, every headline screamed with judgment, and every conversation, both private and public, was weighed against this single act. As we dive deeper into this story, you will see just how complex, layered, and shocking it truly is. We'll explore the private moments, the public reactions, and the unexpected twists that have left even the most seasoned royal watchers stunned. You will meet the advisors who warned him, the friends who tried to guide him, and the family members who waited for a moment of reckoning. You will hear about the strategic decisions, the emotional breakdowns, and the relentless pressure of living under a microscope. And most importantly, you will understand why this apology was not just a statement. It was a turning point, a moment where love, loyalty, and betrayal collided in a way that no one could have anticipated. And yet, even as Harry spoke, even as he delivered those words that would be dissected by millions, the story was far from over. Because betrayal has a way of lingering. Secrets have a way of resurfacing. And the consequences of one person's choices can echo in ways that nobody expects. Harry's apology may have been public, but the truth behind Meghan's actions, the decisions that led to this moment, and the fallout that would follow remain deeply entangled, waiting for the world to fully grasp their significance. So ask yourself, what would you do if someone you love betrayed your trust in the most profound way imaginable? How far would you go to protect them? And how far would you go to protect your family? For Prince Harry, there was no easy answer, and the world is only beginning to see the magnitude of the storm that unfolded. In the chapters ahead, we will unpack every detail, explore every hidden conversation, and reveal the moments that led to a public apology unlike any the monarchy has seen in decades. And just when you think you understand, when you think the apology has closed the chapter, the story takes another twist. A revelation so unexpected, so charged with emotion and consequence, that it changes everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started quietly, almost imperceptibly, with moments so small that no one outside the palace walls could have imagined they would snowball into something so seismic. A text left unanswered. A conversation that ended abruptly. A glance exchanged across the room that held tension more potent than words could convey. These were the first cracks in what would become a profound rift within the royal family. And at the center of it all was Prince Harry, a man whose life had always been dictated by duty, tradition, and the expectations of a monarchy that spanned centuries. Imagine growing up in a world where every gesture is watched, every word recorded, and every action scrutinized under the unforgiving lens of public opinion. Harry knew that from the very beginning. Yet, even for a prince, there comes a moment when personal loyalty collides with family loyalty, and the consequences are impossible to ignore. This was that moment. The tension didn't erupt overnight. It built slowly, layering frustration upon misunderstanding, suspicion upon secrecy, and eventually, heartbreak upon betrayal. And while Harry tried to maintain a facade of calm, of unity, behind the polished smiles and ceremonial appearances, the pressure was mounting. It wasn't just a matter of personal preference or familial disagreement. It was the subtle but unmistakable feeling that trust, once assumed to be unbreakable, was slipping through his fingers. Harry and his brother William had shared a bond forged in the unique crucible of royal life, a bond tested by tragedy, responsibility, and public scrutiny. They had faced the world together, from childhood adventures at Balmoral to the global attention of their mother's untimely death. They understood each other in ways no one else could. And yet, that bond began to show signs of strain long before Meghan Markle entered the picture. The introduction of Meghan into this delicate balance acted like a catalyst, accelerating tensions that had been simmering quietly. She was charming, articulate, and poised, qualities that made her appealing on the surface, but there were whispers among palace staff and aides that not everything was as seamless as it appeared. Subtle disagreements over protocol, differing expectations of private versus public life, and contrasting approaches to royal duties all combined to create friction. For Harry, it was confusing. He loved Meghan. He wanted her to thrive within the royal sphere. But he also had a duty to his family, to tradition, and to a legacy that extended far beyond his personal desires. As the weeks turned into months, these small conflicts began to compound. Meetings that once ran smoothly now ended in frustration. Conversations that were previously lighthearted and joking became tense and calculated. There was an unspoken understanding among palace insiders that something had shifted. The trust that had once been implicit was now questioned. And Harry, caught in the middle, was forced to navigate these choppy waters with incredible care. Every choice had consequences. Every word carried weight. The public saw a smiling couple, hand in hand, attending charitable events and engaging with dignitaries. The headlines praised Meghan's fashion sense, her eloquence, her grace under pressure. But beneath the surface, the palace experienced a different reality. Tensions between Harry and William became more noticeable. Small disagreements escalated into heated debates. Confidants noticed Harry withdrawing, becoming quieter, more introspective. He began confiding in fewer people, carefully choosing who he trusted. And all the while, Meghan's actions, whether intentional or misunderstood, added pressure to an already strained situation. It's important to understand the unique pressures at play here. Unlike ordinary families, where disagreements can be resolved privately, the royal family exists under constant scrutiny. Staff, advisors, and media outlets all play a role in shaping perception. A single misstep can spiral into weeks of coverage, speculation, and controversy. For Harry, this meant that personal grievances could not remain personal for long. Every conflict, every tension, every disagreement was amplified. And when Meghan's alleged betrayal emerged, the consequences were far-reaching. What was this betrayal? At this stage, no one outside the palace could have guessed its depth. Yet for Harry, the signs had been there, small but undeniable hints that something was amiss. It could have been a private conversation gone wrong, an unexpected decision that undermined his authority, or an alignment of interests that left him feeling isolated. Whatever the exact actions, the effect was the same. A growing sense of distance, frustration, and fear that trust, once taken for granted, could no longer be assumed. The rift was not only personal, but symbolic. It represented the clash between love and duty, personal desire and institutional expectation. Harry had long struggled with this tension. From his youth, he had witnessed the sacrifices required by his position, the compromises, the unspoken rules, and the constant balancing act between private happiness and public responsibility. And yet, no amount of preparation could have readied him for the reality of betrayal at such an intimate level, from someone he believed he could trust completely. As the months progressed, this tension began to manifest in ways that could no longer be hidden. Advisors noticed Harry's increasing frustration. William, too, began to show signs of strain, questioning decisions that had once seemed uncontroversial. The palace atmosphere, always carefully managed, grew heavier, filled with unspoken concerns and tentative questions. Every dinner, every gathering, every public appearance carried an underlying current of tension that was impossible to ignore. It is worth considering how much of this rift was influenced by external forces. The media, always eager for a story, sensed the growing divide. Leaks appeared in tabloids, carefully curated and timed to maximize public intrigue. Friends and acquaintances were pulled into the swirl of rumors. each story adding pressure to an already volatile situation. Harry, who had always sought to shield those he loved from public scrutiny, found himself navigating a maze of expectations and speculations, unsure who to trust and uncertain how to proceed. And then came the first undeniable sign that the rift had reached a critical point, an incident that forced Harry to confront the reality of the situation head-on. Whether it was a private conversation exposed to the wrong person, a decision made without consultation, or an action taken that directly contradicted his trust, it became clear that the moment of reckoning had arrived. The cracks in the relationship with Meghan and the tension between him and his brother could no longer be ignored. Something had to give. Harry faced a choice that no one could envy. He could continue to navigate the delicate dance of appearances, pretending everything was fine while the foundation of trust crumbled beneath him. Or he could confront the betrayal, acknowledge the truth, and take steps to protect himself, his family, and the institution he loved. It was a choice that would define not only his personal life, but also the public perception of the monarchy itself. And so, the royal rift emerged. Not with a public outburst or a dramatic confrontation, but quietly, insidiously, in ways that only those closest to the situation could perceive. It was a slow burn, a tension that grew steadily, filling every room, every conversation, every glance with unspoken questions and unacknowledged fears. And by the time the world would eventually learn of it, the rift would have grown so wide, so deep, that reconciliation seemed almost impossible. But just as the cracks were becoming visible, a series of events began to accelerate the timeline, pushing Harry toward a decision he had long hoped to avoid. The betrayal, once subtle, now demanded a response. And for Harry, that response would not remain private for long. The choices he made in those crucial months would culminate in an unprecedented act. A public apology to his father and brother, delivered not in the privacy of a family room, but on the global stage for all the world to witness. What no one could have anticipated, however, was how this rift would continue to grow, even after the apology. Because betrayal, once revealed, cannot be undone. Trust, once broken, cannot be fully restored. And as Harry would soon discover, the repercussions of that initial fracture would echo far beyond the walls of any palace, reshaping relationships, perceptions, and legacies in ways that would leave the world questioning everything they thought they knew. The royal rift had begun. The first cracks were visible, and yet, the storm that was about to follow would be far more intense, far more public, and far more shocking than anyone could have predicted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began like a fairy tale, at least in public. Meghan Markle, a woman whose career had already taken her across television sets and red carpets, entered the royal stage with elegance, charm, and the kind of confidence that seemed to command attention effortlessly. She was the modern princess the world had been waiting for, an American, a divorcee, a woman unafraid to speak her mind. To the outside observer, it looked seamless, almost destined. But inside the royal corridors, a more complicated story was unfolding, one that would plant seeds of unease, tension, and ultimately, betrayal. The first public appearances were meticulously orchestrated. Meghan was poised, articulate, and seemingly at ease with the demands of royal life. Photographers captured every smile, every wave, every perfectly timed gesture. Headlines were glowing. Social media buzzed. The world celebrated a fresh chapter for the monarchy, one that promised modernity and openness. But while the cameras flashed, palace insiders noticed subtle tensions bubbling beneath the surface. Small deviations from protocol, minor misunderstandings, and a different approach to tradition all began to accumulate. What seemed minor to the public was significant behind the palace doors. Harry, for his part, was enchanted. He saw in Meghan not only a partner, but a kindred spirit. Someone willing to challenge norms, speak candidly, and carve her own path even within the rigid framework of royal life. He believed she would complement him, not disrupt the delicate balance of family and duty. And initially, that belief seemed justified. Meghan and Harry appeared inseparable, united in purpose and presence. They championed charitable causes, appeared in public events with ease, and even managed to charm the press during carefully planned engagements. Yet, charm and public grace can mask tension. Behind the smiles and media-perfect moments, Meghan's rise within the royal fold began to unsettle palace insiders. Advisors noticed a shift in dynamics. Protocols that had long been considered non-negotiable were questioned. Decisions were made unilaterally or without the usual consultation, leaving some aides and staff uncertain of how to proceed. While Meghan's intentions may have been personal or professional, the effect was unmistakable. Unease began to ripple through the household. The first signs were subtle, almost imperceptible. A remark in a staff meeting that seemed innocuous at the time was noted for its tone. A slight disagreement over scheduling or event planning became a pattern. Conversations that were once lighthearted and collaborative grew tense. And while no one outside the palace would ever see these moments, those who worked there quietly registered the changes, storing them away as part of a broader narrative. For Harry, these early signs were confusing. He trusted Meghan. He believed in her judgment, her vision, and her loyalty. And yet, the whispers, the glances, the sense of unease could not be ignored. He found himself torn between defending the woman he loved and acknowledging the growing concerns of his family and staff. The role of a prince is not just ceremonial. It is deeply political and emotional, requiring constant navigation of complex relationships and expectations. Harry, like any son in his position, was caught in a web of loyalty, love, and tradition that few could fully understand. As Meghan's presence and influence grew, so did the scrutiny. Every gesture, every decision, every appearance was analyzed for meaning. Was her dress too bold? Was her statement too assertive? Was her schedule too independent? The press, the public, and even palace staff searched for signs of tension, and Meghan's assertiveness, while celebrated by some, was viewed with suspicion by others. It became a delicate balancing act. How to allow a strong, independent woman to flourish within a centuries-old institution designed for conformity. The first cracks in the family dynamic became more apparent during private gatherings. Harry and Meghan's interactions with the senior royals were cordial, polite, and on the surface, affectionate. But subtle disagreements over schedules, priorities, and expectations hinted at underlying tension. William and Harry, once nearly inseparable, began to experience moments of friction. Conversations that had flowed naturally now carried undertones of caution and concern. The palace, always a place of appearances, was becoming a minefield of unspoken rules and quietly shifting alliances. These early signs of unease were compounded by external pressures. The media, always vigilant, sensed the potential for drama. Every public appearance, every comment, every interaction was dissected for hidden meaning. Rumors began circulating, not always grounded in fact, but persistent enough to add stress to the already tense environment. Harry, protective of both Meghan and his family, found himself in an impossible position, managing public perception while attempting to maintain private harmony. The tension escalated as Meghan increasingly asserted her independence within the royal framework. Meetings that traditionally included input from multiple family members were now influenced more directly by her preferences. Events and charitable causes were shaped according to her vision. While innovation and fresh ideas can be positive, in the rigid hierarchy of the monarchy, deviation can be destabilizing. Advisors and family members began to question not only her motives, but also the potential consequences for the family's reputation and internal cohesion. Harry, caught between loyalty to his wife and responsibility to his family, began to experience profound internal conflict. He wanted Meghan to thrive and be accepted, yet he was confronted with the reality that her rise was creating tensions he could not ignore. Every decision he made felt like a choice between love and duty, between supporting his partner and maintaining the delicate balance of family relationships. The pressure was relentless, and Harry increasingly struggled to reconcile his emotions with the demands placed upon him. This period was also marked by subtle but impactful betrayals, small incidents that, in hindsight, were early warning signs of deeper issues to come. Perhaps it was information that was shared selectively, decisions made without transparency, or actions that undermined Harry's authority within the family. Whatever form they took, these incidents created a pattern of unease. planting seeds of doubt and tension that would later bloom into something far more serious. The public narrative, meanwhile, painted a picture of harmony. Meghan and Harry were glamorous, charitable, and committed. They seemed to embody a modern fairy tale, bridging old traditions with contemporary ideals. But the private reality was far more complex. Beneath the smiles and public gestures was a growing sense of apprehension, both within the family and among those closest to them. Advisors whispered, staff exchanged nervous glances, and Harry, increasingly aware of the tensions, felt the weight of conflicting loyalties pressing down on him. It's important to note that Meghan's rise was not inherently negative. She brought energy, perspective, and a modern sensibility that the monarchy had not seen in decades. Her advocacy, her eloquence, and her confidence were genuine strengths. But in the delicate ecosystem of the royal family, change, even positive change, can be destabilizing. For Harry, the challenge was not just managing Meghan's influence, but also navigating the reactions of those who felt their authority or traditions were being undermined. As Meghan became more prominent, the sense of unease escalated. Meetings grew tenser. Private conversations became fraught with subtext. Advisors began documenting concerns more meticulously. The family dynamic, once predictable, became unpredictable. And while Harry remained loyal to both Meghan and his family, he increasingly realized that the situation was unsustainable. Something had to give, and the outcome would have profound consequences for all involved. The stage was now set for the critical turning points to come. Meghan's rise had not only changed her life, but had also reshaped the internal dynamics of the royal family. Tensions, once subtle, had grown to the point where avoidance was no longer possible. Trust, once assumed, was now conditional. And as we move forward in this story, the moments of unease will evolve into undeniable conflict, setting the stage for the betrayal that would ultimately force Harry into a public apology. The family's unease was more than just internal friction. It was a precursor to a storm that would engulf them all. The delicate balance between loyalty, love, and duty had shifted, and the consequences of that shift were only beginning to manifest. Advisors, friends, and even casual observers sensed that something was about to break, but none of them could predict just how explosive it would be. And then came the first event that made it impossible to ignore. A decision, an action, a moment, small on its own, but charged with implications. Forced the palace to acknowledge what had been simmering quietly for months. The unease was no longer theoretical. It was real, tangible, and unavoidable. The family had to confront the reality that Meghan's rise, while glamorous and public, had fundamentally altered the dynamics within the royal household. And just when it seemed like the situation might stabilize, the first hints of betrayal appeared. Subtle at first, almost invisible, but potent enough to set Harry on a path that would lead to unimaginable consequences. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started in whispers, small, seemingly innocuous conversations that, at the time, appeared harmless. But in a palace where every word is scrutinized and every action noted, even the smallest slip could set off a chain reaction. Private conflicts, once contained behind closed doors, began to leak, first into the ears of aides and advisors, then into the media, and eventually into the homes of millions around the world. For Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, what had once been a private struggle was suddenly becoming a public spectacle, and the consequences would be profound. Imagine, for a moment, the pressure of living your life under constant observation. Every gesture is interpreted. Every glance is read as a statement. Every disagreement becomes a headline. Now imagine that disagreements are no longer private. They are amplified, distorted, and presented as evidence of a larger narrative. This was the reality for Harry and Meghan as tensions within the palace began to surface. What had once been minor disagreements over protocol, schedules, or decisions now became fodder for media speculation. The private rifts between Harry, Meghan, and the senior royals were no longer confined to the palace walls. They had entered the court of public opinion. The first leaks were subtle. A staff member mentioned an argument in passing, perhaps exaggerating a detail or omitting context. A friend of Meghan's shared a story about a disagreement that had been misinterpreted. And suddenly, The tabloids had their first hint that all was not well within the royal household. Headlines hinted at tension. Rumors swirled about disagreements between Meghan and the family. Public perception began to shift. What had been a carefully managed image of unity and harmony was now showing cracks. For Harry, this was a nightmare. He had always been protective of his family, fiercely so. The thought of private conflicts being aired publicly, of personal conversations becoming public fodder, was unbearable. Yet there was little he could do. The palace operates on a delicate balance of power, tradition, and media management. Attempts to contain leaks often lead to further leaks, creating a cycle of scrutiny that is almost impossible to break. Every attempt Harry made to stabilize the situation seemed to backfire, and the public drama continued to escalate. What made the situation even more challenging was the nature of the leaks. Many were crafted carefully, with intention, designed to provoke maximum reaction. Stories about disagreements were framed as explosive arguments. Minor disagreements over charity events became evidence of a larger rift. Comments taken out of context were used to suggest conflict where there was none. The palace, long accustomed to controlling its narrative, found itself scrambling to respond, and Harry was at the center of it all. These leaks were not just damaging, they were emotional. For Harry, seeing private struggles presented publicly, often in a distorted or sensationalized manner, was devastating. He trusted Meghan, but trust alone could not shield him from the consequences of exposure. Every headline felt like a betrayal, not only of privacy, but of the integrity of the family. The stress, the public judgment, and the relentless media attention created a pressure cooker environment. Harry's responses had to be measured, deliberate, and politically aware, yet still human and emotionally authentic, a near impossible task under such scrutiny. The leaks had another effect. They widened the rift between Harry and his family. William, Charles, and other senior royals were aware of the stories circulating in the press, and they began to question Harry's judgment. If private conflicts could become public, it suggested a lack of discretion and inability to manage sensitive information. For Harry, this was a double bind: protect Meghan and risk alienating his family, or appease his family and risk betraying Meghan's trust. The tension was unbearable, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. It wasn't just the press that amplified these private conflicts. Friends, advisors, and even casual acquaintances became part of the chain. Stories passed along in confidence, sometimes with exaggeration or bias, created an almost unstoppable momentum. What had once been a private disagreement became a narrative of betrayal, tension, and impending fallout. Harry watched helplessly as every personal detail, every intimate moment, was dissected and debated. The protective bubble he had tried to maintain around Meghan and himself was gone. The private had become public, and there was no turning back. And yet, within this chaos, Harry continued to strive for balance. He attempted to mediate, to calm tensions, to reassure both Meghan and his family that resolution was possible. He organized private meetings, facilitated discussions, and tried to address misunderstandings before they escalated. But the more he tried to manage, the more public the conflicts became. The leaks were relentless, and each news story created additional pressure. Every attempt to reconcile, every gesture of goodwill, was scrutinized and sometimes misrepresented. The public drama also had a personal toll on Meghan. While she had navigated media attention before, the scrutiny within the royal framework was unique. Every comment, every action, every appearance was analyzed for hidden meaning. Advisors and staff, already uneasy about her rise, began to interpret her behavior through a lens of suspicion. The same qualities that had once made her appear confident and capable were now seen as divisive or controlling. The leaks magnified this perception, creating an environment where Meghan felt increasingly isolated and under siege. This is where betrayal began to take shape. Not just the alleged betrayal that would later emerge, but the sense that trust, once assumed, could no longer be taken for granted. Harry found himself in a position where he had to navigate a labyrinth of competing loyalties. He loved Meghan. He wanted to protect her. But he also had a duty to his family, a responsibility to tradition, and an obligation to the institution of the monarchy. The public exposure of private conflicts forced him into an impossible situation, one where every choice carried profound consequences. Some of the leaks were accidental, some intentional, and some designed to manipulate perception. It became increasingly difficult for Harry to discern truth from fiction, reality from spin. Every interaction, every decision, every conversation was potentially subject to public interpretation. And as the narrative unfolded in the media, it began to shape perceptions before he could even respond. Harry realized that the story was no longer his own. It was being written by others, with consequences he could not fully control. The culmination of this public drama was a turning point. As private conflicts continued to leak, and as the media frenzy escalated, Harry faced an ultimatum of sorts. Either continue to navigate the impossible tension between Meghan, his family, and the press, or take decisive action to address the betrayal and protect the remaining trust within the royal household. This was a moment that would define him, shape his legacy, and ultimately lead to the public apology that the world would witness in shock and disbelief. The leaks, the rumors, the stories, they were more than mere gossip. They were catalysts, forcing the private into the public sphere, creating pressure that was impossible to ignore. And in the midst of it all, Harry had to make choices that no ordinary person could ever imagine. Choices that would determine not only his personal life, but the future of his relationships, his family, and the monarchy itself. And just when it seemed the storm of public drama had reached its peak, the first signs of true betrayal emerged. Acts, words, and decisions that would leave Harry with no choice but to confront the impossible reality he had been trying to avoid. The private conflicts had become public, and the public revelation of betrayal was about to change everything. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It started as a whisper, almost too small to register. But whispers, over time, can build into a roar, and in the world of the royal family, a whisper of betrayal can become a headline overnight. The betrayal, whatever its form, had been quietly simmering beneath the surface for months. Subtle signs, little incidents, and unexplained behaviors had hinted that something was amiss. Harry, ever loyal, had tried to dismiss them, to rationalize the tension, to protect Meghan and himself from suspicion. But the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it did, it would shock everyone involved. Imagine discovering that the person you trusted most, the person you confided in, laughed with, and loved, may have acted in ways that undermined not only you, but the people closest to you. That is the position Harry found himself in, and it was not a betrayal that could be easily ignored or forgiven. It was deep, intricate, and profoundly personal, touching both his private life and the public perception of the monarchy. The first concrete signs of betrayal were subtle. Perhaps a meeting went differently than expected, or a conversation revealed intentions that had been hidden. Advisors noticed discrepancies between what Meghan had said publicly and the reality behind the palace walls. Staff began to pick up on inconsistencies. Decisions that contradicted previous agreements, actions that seemed designed to sow discord, moments that raised questions about loyalty. Each incident on its own might have been overlooked. Together, they painted a troubling picture, one that forced Harry to confront a reality he had long feared. The nature of the betrayal was multi-layered. It was not just about actions or words. It was about trust. Trust broken in the most intimate ways. Trust violated where it mattered most. Friends and advisors whispered of decisions Meghan had made without consultation, of conversations that had been misrepresented, and of alliances that seemed to exclude Harry in ways that left him isolated. It was a betrayal of expectation, of loyalty, and, most painfully, of the belief that love could shield him from the pressures of the world. Harry's response was initially one of disbelief. How could someone he loved, someone he had elevated within his life and the royal sphere, act in ways that jeopardized not only their relationship, but also the fragile equilibrium of the family? He wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. Had he misjudged her character? Was he naive to believe in her loyalty? And most importantly, what did this mean for his relationship with his father, his brother, and the institution he had been born into? The betrayal became undeniable during a series of incidents that Harry could no longer ignore. Meetings, private conversations, and carefully planned events revealed a pattern. Choices had been made without transparency. Actions that should have been collaborative were unilateral. And the cumulative effect of these decisions was devastating. A sense of isolation, a loss of control, and the painful recognition that the woman he loved may have prioritized other interests above their shared bond. The palace staff noticed it first. Subtle changes in communication, the hesitation in previously routine interactions, and the evident tension between Harry and Meghan became impossible to miss. Advisors began documenting events meticulously, understanding that the situation had evolved beyond personal disagreement into something that could no longer be managed quietly. The private betrayal had become an organizational issue, one that threatened the stability of the family and the reputation of the monarchy itself. The emotional toll on Harry was profound. He had long balanced the pressures of public duty with private desire, always careful to protect those he loved while upholding tradition. Now, he faced an unprecedented challenge, reconciling his love for Meghan with the reality of her actions, all while maintaining the trust of his family and the public. It was a balancing act so precarious that one misstep could unravel everything he had worked to protect. What made the betrayal particularly painful was its timing. The couple had been navigating intense public scrutiny, relentless media coverage, and the pressures of royal duty. The stakes were higher than ever. Every interaction, every public appearance, every statement was analyzed, often through the lens of the alleged betrayal. Harry was caught between defending the woman he loved and addressing the implications of her actions for the family and the institution he revered. The leak of private incidents to the media magnified the betrayal. What might have remained a private, internal conflict was now presented as a narrative of scandal. Every minor disagreement was spun as evidence of disloyalty, every decision questioned, every gesture scrutinized. For Harry, the betrayal was not only personal but public. He had to manage the emotional fallout while navigating the political and social consequences, a task that few in history have faced with such intensity. Harry's allies began to offer counsel, though not all advice was aligned. Some urged confrontation, others discretion. But the consensus was clear. The betrayal had reached a point where it could no longer be ignored. Action was required, not only to protect Harry's own well-being, but to safeguard the family structure and maintain the monarchy's integrity. Yet the decision was far from simple. Addressing betrayal in a royal context is not just about private reconciliation. It involves public perception, media strategy, and careful timing. Every choice carried the potential for misunderstanding, criticism, and lasting impact. The revelation of betrayal was compounded by the emotional complexity of the situation. Harry loved Meghan. He had stood by her, celebrated her successes, and defended her against critics. And yet, he now faced the stark reality that love alone could not resolve the tensions that had arisen. The betrayal was real, tangible, and undeniable. It demanded acknowledgement, confrontation, and ultimately, action. As Harry processed the implications, he began to understand the depth of the consequences. The betrayal had far-reaching implications for his relationship with Meghan, for his relationship with his father and brother, and for the broader institution he had been born to serve. Every interaction, every statement, every decision moving forward would be colored by this revelation. The stakes had never been higher, and the margin for error had never been smaller. The palace, too, recognized the gravity of the situation. Senior royals convened to discuss how to address the betrayal, weighing the options between private resolution and public acknowledgement. Advisors debated the potential fallout, the risks to the monarchy's reputation, and the necessity of preserving familial bonds. The complexity of the situation was unprecedented. The betrayal was not a simple matter of personal grievance. It was a crisis that touched every layer of the royal institution, from private relationships to global perception. It was at this point that Harry faced a decision that would define the trajectory of his personal and public life. Could he continue to navigate the betrayal privately, risking further exposure and escalating tension? Or would he confront the issue openly, acknowledging the betrayal and taking responsibility in a way that few had ever witnessed in royal history? The weight of this choice was immense. Every outcome carried profound consequences. And so, the betrayal was revealed, not in a single dramatic moment, but as the culmination of months of tension, leaks, and subtle signs that had been building beneath the surface. It was a betrayal that challenged Harry's understanding of loyalty, trust, and love. It was a betrayal that forced him to confront the painful reality that even the strongest relationships can be tested in ways that defy expectation. The revelation marked a turning point. Harry could no longer remain passive, could no longer hope that the tensions would resolve themselves. Action was required, and the nature of that action would shock the world. The betrayal had set into motion a series of events that would lead to an unprecedented public apology. A moment of vulnerability and accountability that would leave both the monarchy and the public stunned. And yet, even as the betrayal became undeniable, questions remained. How would the family respond? How would the public perceive it? And what were the long-term implications for Harry, Meghan, and the monarchy? The answers would unfold in dramatic fashion, revealing layers of complexity, emotion, and tension that no one outside the palace could have anticipated. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The storm of betrayal had erupted, and Harry was caught at the center. But while the public watched the drama unfold, what few could see was the private struggle consuming him, a battle between love, loyalty, duty, and personal integrity. The world saw a prince navigating headlines, paparazzi flashes, and tabloids teeming with speculation. What the world could not see was the internal conflict, the sleepless nights, and the silent moments of despair that haunted him in the quiet hours. Imagine being forced to reconcile two worlds, the one where your heart belongs to the woman you love, and the one where your duty to family and institution demands compromise. For Harry, every day was a test of endurance. Every decision carried consequences far beyond his own life. Every conversation with Meghan or his family became a careful negotiation, weighted with emotion, expectation, and fear. And yet, the human need for honesty, connection, and emotional relief could not be suppressed forever. The first days after the betrayal were marked by confusion and disbelief. Harry had long trusted Meghan, confided in her, and built a life around their partnership. How could the woman he loved take actions that seemed to undermine not only him, but also the family he cherished? Every attempt to understand her motives, every effort to rationalize the behavior, felt like navigating a maze with invisible walls. There was no clear path forward, no easy answer. Sleep became a rare commodity. Harry would lie awake, replaying conversations, analyzing gestures, and imagining alternative outcomes. What could he have done differently? Where did trust break down? Was it a misunderstanding, or was it something more deliberate? The questions multiplied, each answer raising further doubts. The weight of expectation pressed heavily upon him. Not just the public expectation of composure, but the private expectation of maintaining family harmony and marital stability. In these moments of solitude, Harry experienced profound emotional turbulence. Anger, confusion, guilt, and grief swirled together. He loved Meghan, yet the betrayal cut deep. He felt responsible, wondering if his actions, or inactions, had contributed to the breakdown of trust. He felt torn between loyalty to his family and commitment to his spouse, a conflict that no ordinary person could comprehend fully. Every heartbeat seemed to echo with questions about choices, consequences, and moral responsibility. The private struggle extended beyond emotional pain. It manifested in daily life. Every public appearance became a performance, a delicate dance of maintaining dignity while suppressing inner turmoil. Advisors observed a prince increasingly withdrawn, cautious, and tense. Meetings that once flowed easily were now fraught with careful phrasing and guarded statements. Friends noted his introspection, his moments of melancholy, and his growing sense of isolation. Harry, who had spent much of his life in service and public engagement, was now confronting a battle that could not be solved by action alone. It required understanding, reconciliation, and sometimes painful acceptance. One of the most challenging aspects of Harry's private struggle was the duality of perception. To the public, Meghan was often depicted as the victim, Harry as supportive and steadfast. Behind closed doors, however, the reality was far more complex. The betrayal had introduced uncertainty into every interaction. Trust, once implicit, now required verification. Conversations were filtered, intentions analyzed, and decisions scrutinized. Harry faced the unprecedented challenge of protecting his relationship while navigating the ramifications of a betrayal that touched both his personal life and his family's legacy. Family relationships, too, were strained under the weight of the private struggle. William, Charles, and other senior royals observed Harry's growing tension and were acutely aware of the underlying issues. Attempts to communicate and reconcile were met with caution and sensitivity, yet even the most careful approaches could not fully bridge the emotional gap. Harry felt torn between defending Meghan and maintaining loyalty to his family. Every choice seemed like a compromise, every action a negotiation between competing priorities. The pressure was compounded by the relentless media cycle. Even in moments of private reflection, Harry knew that any perceived misstep could be amplified, misinterpreted, or distorted. Every decision, from family gatherings to public appearances, required meticulous consideration. The betrayal had not only disrupted trust within the household, but had also exposed Harry to heightened scrutiny, amplifying the stakes of every interaction. The struggle was not merely emotional. It was strategic, political, and profoundly isolating. Harry's private struggle was also deeply psychological. Feelings of guilt and self-blame pervaded his thoughts. Was there something he had overlooked? Something he could have done differently? The human tendency to internalize responsibility intensified the emotional burden. He faced the paradox of loving someone who had betrayed him in some form, while trying to preserve the relationships that defined his life. It was a tension that demanded not just resilience, but extraordinary emotional intelligence, insight, and courage. Throughout this period, Harry sought counsel. Friends, confidants, and advisors provided guidance, but even their advice was fraught with complexity. Should he confront Meghan directly, risking further conflict and exposure? Should he prioritize the family and attempt to minimize disruption? Or should he seek a path that preserved both love and loyalty, even if it meant personal sacrifice? Each option carried profound consequences, and none offered certainty. The emotional stakes were heightened by the awareness that the public narrative was already forming. Leaks, rumors, and speculation were shaping perceptions, leaving Harry with little control over the story being told. The betrayal was no longer a private matter. It was part of a broader, global conversation about loyalty, love, and accountability. Harry felt the weight of not only his own choices, but also the impact those choices would have on public perception, family dynamics, and institutional reputation. Amid this struggle, Harry's humanity was on full display. Moments of private vulnerability, anger, sadness, despair, revealed the depth of his inner conflict. He questioned motives, examined intentions, and reflected on values. Love, loyalty, and duty collided in ways that created intense emotional friction. And through it all, he carried the knowledge that every step he took could either mend or further fracture relationships that mattered most to him. Perhaps the most defining aspect of Harry's private struggle was the realization that a resolution would require courage. Not the courage to confront Meghan or to navigate public scrutiny, but the courage to act decisively, to acknowledge the betrayal, and to take responsibility in a way that upheld his principles and preserved the dignity of those involved. It was a test of character, resilience, and moral clarity, demanding that he reconcile emotion with obligation in a way few have ever faced. And so, Harry continued to navigate this private storm, walking a delicate line between personal loyalty, family duty, and public accountability. Every day presented a new challenge, a new choice, and a new layer of complexity. The betrayal had forced him into a position where inaction was not an option, and every action carried immense weight. He faced a reality where love and trust could no longer guarantee safety or clarity, where decisions were measured not just in personal terms, but in the potential impact on history, family, and public perception. The private struggle was far from over. Every conversation, every reflection, every attempt at reconciliation became a step toward a pivotal decision. The one that would force Harry into the public eye and compel him to deliver an apology that no one expected, a declaration that would ripple through the monarchy and around the world. The stakes were enormous, the emotional cost immense, and the path forward uncertain. And just when it seemed that Harry's struggle might remain private, the pressure escalated. The betrayal, the leaks, and the mounting tension all converged to create a moment where concealment was impossible. A decision had to be made, a choice that would set in motion the events leading to a public apology, a revelation that would stun the world, and a turning point in Harry's life that could not be undone. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. The betrayal had already shaken Harry to his core, but the world outside the palace walls was about to magnify it in ways he could never have anticipated. Leaks, rumors, and scandals began to surface, spreading through newspapers, online tabloids, and social media with alarming speed. What had been private, the whispers, the subtle betrayals, the quiet tension between Harry, Meghan, and the senior royals, was now thrust into the global spotlight. The media storm was merciless, relentless, and impossible to ignore. Imagine waking up every day to see the most intimate moments of your life analyzed, judged, and debated by millions of people who have no understanding of the full story. That was Harry's reality. Every leak, whether intentional or accidental, was amplified, twisted, and sensationalized. Conversations that had once been confidential became fodder for speculation. Private disagreements became narratives of public scandal. And every headline seemed to undermine the trust and loyalty he had fought so hard to maintain. The first major leaks came quietly. Staff members, once loyal and discreet, began sharing details with journalists. Friends who were privy to conversations or events offered versions of stories that, intentionally or not, cast doubt on Harry's judgment, Meghan's loyalty, or the unity of the family. Each leak was small on its own, but the cumulative effect was devastating. The palace, long accustomed to controlling its public image, found itself reacting to stories it could not contain. The narrative was no longer theirs to manage. It was dictated by the media, and every day brought a new wave of scrutiny. The scandals were both subtle and explosive. At first, they appeared in the form of innuendo or insinuation. Sources say stories, ambiguous quotes, and questions about relationships and loyalty. But as weeks passed, the coverage escalated. Allegations of favoritism, miscommunication, and even deliberate betrayal began appearing in print and online. Headlines implied tension, friction, and conflict at the highest levels of the monarchy. Social media amplified these stories, adding speculation, memes, and conspiracy theories to the mix. Harry watched helplessly as private struggles became public spectacle, with consequences that could not be reversed. One of the most insidious aspects of the media storm was how it exploited perception. What had once been subtle disagreements between Harry, Meghan, and the family were presented as explosive confrontations. Minor misunderstandings were portrayed as calculated betrayals. Decisions made for personal or professional reasons were reframed as deliberate attacks on the monarchy. The constant pressure left Harry in a position where every word, every action, every public appearance was a potential headline. Even silence could be interpreted as guilt or complicity. The relentless scrutiny took a personal toll. Sleep became increasingly rare as Harry grappled not only with the betrayal itself, but with the way it was being portrayed to the world. Advisors offered guidance, but even their counsel was filtered through a lens of risk management. Every strategy had to consider public perception, family relationships, and long-term consequences. The pressure was immense, and mistakes could have repercussions that would last for generations. The media storm also affected Meghan. As stories circulated, her public image was subjected to intense criticism and praise in equal measure. Supporters highlighted her strength, independence, and advocacy. Critics questioned her motives, her loyalty, and her respect for royal traditions. Every appearance, every comment, every social engagement was scrutinized for signs of alignment or conflict with Harry, with the family, and with the institution of the monarchy itself. The tension was relentless, and the stakes were extraordinarily high. The palace itself was forced to respond. Senior advisors and communications teams worked tirelessly to manage narratives, clarify facts, and mitigate damage. But the sheer volume and speed of leaks made containment nearly impossible. Every official statement was dissected for hidden meaning. Every denial was interpreted as confirmation. And the more the palace tried to maintain control, the more the public perceived drama, scandal, and division. It was a perfect storm, and Harry was at its epicenter. The media storm was not only external, it exacerbated internal family tensions. William and Charles were acutely aware of the leaks and their impact. Their concern was not simply about public perception. It was about loyalty, trust, and the integrity of the institution. For Harry, this added a layer of complexity to an already emotionally charged situation. He had to navigate family expectations while managing public scrutiny, a task few could imagine and even fewer could execute without misstep. Friends and confidants became part of the media cycle, sometimes unintentionally. Casual conversations, shared stories, and observations meant to provide support were interpreted as evidence or commentary. Even well-intentioned advice could be repurposed as narrative ammunition by journalists seeking sensational angles. Harry found himself in a constant state of vigilance, analyzing every interaction, every statement, every gesture for potential consequences. The emotional and strategic toll was immense. The leaks also fueled speculation about Meghan's alleged betrayal. Stories began to suggest deliberate actions, secret alliances, and concealed motives. Every narrative reinforced the idea that trust had been violated, and that the repercussions would be felt not only in private relationships but in the broader institution of the monarchy. Harry faced the daunting task of defending his loved one while confronting the very real impact of actions that may have been deceptive or damaging. Public opinion became a weapon and a pressure point. Polls, social media trends, and public commentary added another layer of complexity. Supporters of Meghan praised her independence and courage. Critics questioned her loyalty and influence. Each story, each headline, each social media post became part of the ongoing battle for narrative control. Harry had to navigate this minefield while maintaining composure, protecting relationships, and safeguarding the integrity of his own character.